Hey guys, tonight, we're heading straight back to the flickering candlelight of a Victorian bedroom, where the wallpaper is busy with creeping roses. The fireplace sighs quietly, and you, yes, you are the unfortunate hero trapped in another sleepless night. The hour is indecent, somewhere between the last echo of a carriage wheel and the first hopeful trill of a dawn sparrow. There's the persistent ticking of a mantel clock, a faint draft teasing the hem of your quilt, and the peculiar certainty that the harder you chase sleep, the faster it runs away. You slip your toes out from under the coverlet, testing the temperature, an ancient ritual observed by countless insomniacs since time immemorial. The bed is iron heavy enough to require 3 strong servants just to shift it during spring cleaning, and your pillow is stuffed with a questionable blend of feathers and what might be, if rumors are to be believed, horsehair. For Victorians, sleep wasn't just a necessity. It was a nightly drama starring yourself and a supporting cast of drafts, mysterious aches, and the general fear that if you didn't rest, you probably wouldn't survive the next day. Yes, the Victorians took their anxieties to bed right alongside their hot water bottles and lavender sachets. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Drop your location and your local hour in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin to listen as the room's sounds settle in. The slow groan of floorboards reminds you that these old houses were never meant for silence. Every creak, every distant footfall is a reminder that you're not alone in your struggle. Historians still debate whether the Victorians' notorious anxiety about bad night air made insomnia worse, or whether the constant noise of city life was the true villain. Either way, you clutch your candle and decide to make the most of this wakeful moment. You shuffle to the window, peering out onto a street gaslit and glistening with last night's rain. Maybe you think everyone else is asleep, but a cat streaks by, followed by the dim glow of another candle in a neighbor's window. Even in this age of horse-drawn everything, someone is always up, always pacing, always listening to the same clock. Tick, tick, tick. Your eye catches on the bedside table a stack of self-help books promising instant slumber. The Art of Relaxing the Mind. Dr. Pumblechook's Complete Guide to Bedtime Bliss. Historians still argue whether Victorians actually believed these guides worked or just bought them for show. What's certain is that you right now are one of millions caught in the sticky web of a culture obsessed with sleep, yet almost comically bad at actually achieving it. A shiver reminds you that, yes, even with all these layers, linen flannel and extra blanket, you can barely lift, you're not immune to the nighttime chill. One mainstream fact: many Victorians kept bedroom fires going year-round, convinced that a cold room spelled certain doom. Meanwhile, a quirky tidbit: some families believed putting a slice of stale bread under your pillow would soak up nightmares. Historians still debate whether this was folk wisdom or just a prank older siblings played on the gullible. You try to imagine the feeling of waking up with breadcrumbs in your hair. You curl up again, listening for the faintest sign of drowsiness. Not yet, of course. The long night stretches ahead. But hey, at least you're not alone, and at least you're here. As the gentle shadows slip across the wallpaper, you decide that if nothing else, tonight will be an adventure in curiosity and comfort. One strange remedy at a time. You're not the only one wandering in the small hours. Step outside your Victorian home, careful on the uneven cobbles, and you'll find a city that stubbornly refuses to sleep. London, for all its soot and fog, is bright with gas lamps and alive with the faint shuffle of other insomniacs drifting through the gloom. The night is dense, the air tinged with coal smoke and the sharp tang of horse manure, and the only thing more plentiful than puddles are the tired faces peeking out from lace-curtained windows. Tonight you might find yourself bundled in a shawl, slippers scuffing along as you take a nervous walk to nowhere in particular. Victorian London was a city of night owls, whether by choice or affliction. Historians still argue whether urban noise or social anxiety kept so many people awake, but either way, sleeplessness had reached something close to a national pastime by the mid-1800s. Some say it was the never-ending clip-clop of carriages. Others blame the echoing cries of street vendors hawking hot pies, roasted chestnuts, or the infamous knocker-up making their rounds with long poles to rouse factory workers at dawn. You pass a shadowy figure leaning against a lamppost. Perhaps he's a watchman, perhaps another wanderer who's had enough of tossing and turning. There's a strange kinship here, a brotherhood of the sleepless, all moving in a slow parade from doorways to alleys, hoping that a brisk walk might shock their stubborn brains into sleepiness. If you're lucky, the night watchman gives you a nod and a yawn that says, "You too, eh?" Even Queen Victoria herself was known for her bouts of insomnia, often pacing palace corridors in a silk nightgown, fretting over affairs of state or the latest family drama. It's comforting to know you have royal company in your sleeplessness, though she admittedly had rather more servants to bring her cocoa at odd hours. Still, whether your home is palace or humble terrace, the ritual is the same. A mug of something warm, a cautious peek at the clock, and that hope always just out of reach that the next hour will bring rest. One mainstream historical fact: by the late 19th century, London had more street lighting than any city in Europe. And while it was meant to drive away crime, it also managed to drive away the possibility of true darkness. People blamed the constant glow for their racing thoughts, while medical journals fretted about artificial light poisoning the nerves. A quirky tidbit: some Victorians claimed that sleeping with a book under your pillow would draw away excess energy from the brain. Historians still argue whether anyone ever truly felt less awake as a result. The cold nips at your ankles as you turn homeward. The neighborhood cat gives you a baleful look as if to say, "It's late even for me." You let yourself back inside, careful not to wake the house, and marvel at the thought that across the city, a million other souls might be doing the same. Maybe if you listen closely, you'll hear them through the walls, beneath the quiet rattle of the windows, all those other hearts keeping time with yours. You settle back into bed, the sheets chilly and oddly comforting, and you wonder, was anyone in this city ever truly asleep? Or were they all just waiting for the world to tire itself out? The street outside quiets for a moment, and you feel a small sense of solidarity with every other night owl, from the watchman to the royals. Together you're holding up the whole wide world while everyone else dreams. Section 3: Counting sheep. Surely you've tried it at least once, lying on your back in the blue glow of insomnia, willing your mind to focus on anything but the unkind mathematics of hours left until morning. The Victorians, with their fondness for routines and rituals, embraced the sheep method with enthusiastic desperation. Of course, leave it to the British to make even this simple act into a kind of performance. You don't just count sheep, you count them as they leap over a perfectly white stile in a meadow that never seems to run out of woolly jumpers. Historians still debate whether this counting was ever meant to work, or whether it was just a genteel distraction from more troubling midnight thoughts. Some 19th century self-help books insisted that the true benefit was occupying the mind with monotony, while others suggested that if you found sheep too dull, you could count ducks, horses, or even the ticking seconds between clock chimes. It's almost comforting knowing that restlessness is universal. If Victorian London was full of sleepless souls, you can bet a few of them were busy envisioning imaginary flocks. Tonight, as you try to count along, you can't help but notice that the sheep are oddly formal, their wool suspiciously tidy, and they never once stray from the designated jumping route. One mainstream historical fact: the phrase counting sheep actually dates back centuries before Queen Victoria, but it was during her reign that it became a household remedy endlessly recommended by well-meaning friends, newspapers, and even a few physicians. A quirky tidbit 1875 guide advised readers to visualize each sheep wearing a little nightcap, a detail sure to either lull you into sleep or leave you awake smiling at the absurdity. You glance over at the copy of Mrs. Glubb's Restorative Sleep on your nightstand, the dog-eared chapter titled, On the Useful Powers of Boredom. Mrs. Glubb in her wisdom suggests that if you lose track of your sheep, you can simply start over with no penalty, save the gentle weariness of repetition. Historians still argue whether these mental exercises genuinely soothed anyone, or whether they only highlighted the clock's unrelenting march toward dawn. Maybe you prefer numbers to livestock. Victorian math teachers never once to miss an opportunity for a lesson sometimes prescribed arithmetic problems for the sleepless. Recite your times tables backward from 12, they'd say. And when you reach 6, you will surely be unconscious. Of course, if you were particularly unlucky, you'd get stuck at 8, unable to remember if 8 times 7 was 56, or if you'd already counted that sheep. You try these remedies, eyes closed, mind drifting. The ticking of the clock takes on a sheep-like rhythm. Tick 1, talk 2, tick 3. Maybe you start to imagine the sheep themselves getting bored, dozing mid-leap, toppling gently into the grass, and you realize you're smiling in the dark. If nothing else, it's a welcome change from the fretful tossing of anxious thoughts. It's in these small, repetitive rituals that the Victorian night really comes alive. Quiet, silly, a little desperate, but somehow comforting. After all, no one can stay tense forever while mentally dressing sheep in nightcaps or reciting multiplication tables backward. In a world obsessed with efficiency, sometimes the most effective medicine is boredom itself. You let your thoughts drift, the parade of sheep continuing just out of sight. No one's keeping score but you. And if you lose count, well, just blame it on the clock. Not every Victorian sleepless night was spent counting sheep. Sometimes the cure came in a teacup. You sit upright, feeling the telltale heaviness behind your eyes, and reach for the teapot that's been patiently keeping watch on your nightstand. This is no ordinary Earl Grey or chamomile. Tonight's brew is a mysterious concoction from the local apothecary, promising swift passage to slumber in ornate copper plate. The label lists ingredients that are, to put it gently, questionable by modern standards: opium, laudanum, and a dash of valerian root for good measure. Yes, in the Victorian age it was perfectly ordinary to add a bit of opium to your evening tea, especially if sleep proved elusive. Historians still argue whether these potions were truly meant as remedies, or simply a socially acceptable excuse to take the edge off. Either way, the result was the same: a blissful haze followed if you were lucky by dreamless rest. One mainstream fact: laudanum and opium tincture was sold over the counter and recommended for everything from coughs to colic, to, of course, nervous sleeplessness. The quirky twist: even children's sleep syrups could contain a hearty dose of narcotics, something that makes you look at that innocent-looking blue glass bottle on your dresser with newfound suspicion. Victorians trusted their pharmacists with remarkable loyalty. You might wander into a chemist's shop at midnight, ring a little brass bell and ask for something to quiet the nerves. The shopkeeper, with his impressive mustache and air of medical mystery, would reach behind the counter and present you with a neatly labeled vial. If you were lucky, you'd get a blend with just enough opium to relax the mind without toppling into nightmares. If not, well, you'd wake up groggy, but at least you'd slept. Sometimes sleep was induced not by chemistry, but by sheer monotony. Ladies in silk robes sipped poppy tea in drawing rooms while the clock chimed midnight, pretending they weren't just waiting to yawn. Gentlemen, meanwhile, might treat themselves to a glass of sleep cordial at the club, sharing drowsy stories about their worst nights. There was even a bit of competitive spirit in it. Whose apothecary concoction was the fastest, the most reliable, or the least likely to induce embarrassing sleepwalking episodes? Historians still debate whether the true benefit came from the opium, the ritual, or just knowing you weren't alone in your nighttime struggles. You take a cautious sip purely for research, of course, and imagine the slow fog drifting in behind your eyelids. Maybe it works, or maybe you just feel a little fuzzy. At least if nothing else, you now understand why so many Victorian memoirs end with, "And at last blessed sleep found me." There's humor here too. You can almost picture the advertisements lining the newspapers. Sir Clodworthy's night-night drops, sweet dreams in every dose. There's a certain charm in how matter-of-fact the Victorians were about their chemical helpers, even as the dangers quietly accumulated. You recall a story, possibly apocryphal, about a famous poet who fell asleep mid-sonnet head, dropping into his inkpot thanks to one too many elixirs of repose. Historians still argue whether he ever finished the poem. Now your eyelids heavier. You nestle deeper under your quilt, grateful for the privilege of safe modern sleep aids, no opium required. If only your mind would drift as easily as the Victorians promised. At least you're not alone, sharing a drowsy camaraderie with generations of midnight tea drinkers, all just trying to reach the far shore of sleep. As the minutes stretch and sleep remains stubbornly out of reach, your thoughts wander to the age-old ritual of the midnight snack. In the Victorian era, the solution to insomnia was often found not in a bottle, but in the kitchen. You shuffle across the chilly floorboards, candle in hand, to the larder, an adventure of creaking doors and the smell of slightly stale bread. The Victorian midnight menu is, let's say, more functional than fun. If you're lucky, you might find a crust of toast, a bowl of thin gruel, or a wedge of cheese that's seen better days. One mainstream fact: Victorian medical authorities actually recommended late-night eating for some insomniacs, believing that a light snack settled the humors and encouraged drowsiness. Doctors would prescribe bland foods, never anything too rich or spicy, lest your digestion launch a rebellion and keep you up until sunrise. The quirky twist. Some guides insisted on bread soaked in cold water as the ultimate soporific, while others swore by warmed milk, with a whisper of nutmeg or a spoonful of honey. Historians still argue whether these recommendations had any real effect, or if people were simply grasping at whatever comfort they could find. You take a bite of cold, limp toast and try not to think about the cheese's questionable scent. Perhaps in a more daring household, you might find sleep gruel, a dubious porridge made with oats water and whatever else happened to be lying around. The Victorians had an endless appetite for the strange and the practical. There are even stories of families keeping a special night tin under the bed just in case hunger struck between midnight and dawn, sparing you the indignity of rattling around the kitchen and waking the cat. For those of wealth and means, midnight nibbles might be a bit fancier. Tea cakes, sponge fingers, or leftover roast tucked beneath a napkin. But most households were not so lavish. The truth was that insomnia made everyone an equal rich-poor. Titled or tired, anyone could find themselves scrounging the pantry, hoping a bite or two would lure sleep closer. You return to breadcrumbs on your nightshirt, and a sense of solidarity with every other nocturnal snacker past and present. Maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't, but at least your stomach is too busy to fret. Historians still debate whether the Victorians' faith in their culinary sleep aids was genuine, or just a clever excuse for midnight mischief. As you nestle back under the covers, you realize you've joined an ancient tradition, breaking the night silence with a quiet feast, and savoring, however briefly, the simple hope that tomorrow perhaps you'll sleep just a little more soundly. Back under your weighty quilt, you survey your surroundings, eyeing every draft and patch of moonlight, as if it might be responsible for your ongoing sleeplessness. If there's one thing Victorians fretted about besides everything, it was their sleeping environment. Heavy curtains are drawn with military precision, thick enough to block out both the lamplight and any errant night air. You run a finger along the velvet drapes, feeling the dense dust-laden fabric, and remember, for many in this era, a well-shaded, tightly sealed bedroom was considered essential for draft-proof dreams. A mainstream historical fact by the mid-19th century, the rise of the middle class meant more people could afford proper window treatments and insulation. The Victorians became obsessed with the perfect sleep environment, convinced that even the smallest draft could spell disaster for one's health. Parents would inspect the nursery for creeping chills, and advertisements promised window stoppers, rubber-sealed doors, and the latest in ventilated yet windless design. A quirky tidbit: it wasn't unusual for families to stuff rag socks or even yesterday's newspapers into window cracks, all in a bid to keep the dreaded night air at bay. Historians still argue whether these elaborate efforts made any difference. Some claim it kept out illness. Others insist it only bred a new kind of restlessness. You sit up to adjust the curtains yourself, suddenly aware of the faint ghostly movement of the fabric in the breeze. There's a moment's panic. Was the window left open a sliver? You imagine a chorus of Victorian mothers tutting in disapproval. Sleep hygiene before the phrase existed was a kind of sacred ritual. The room must be cool, but not cold. Dark, but not oppressive. Silent, yet not so silent that you could hear your own worries thumping in your chest. The room with its thick drapes and sealed windows becomes oddly claustrophobic. You're grateful for the extra blanket, but also perhaps just a bit too warm. You roll over, remembering how some doctors advocated for aired-out bedding and periodic sunbathing of mattresses, advice often ignored for fear of chills or city soot. The result: bedrooms were sometimes stuffy enough to send even the most persistent insomniac shuffling for a gasp of hallway air. Still, you follow the rules, fluffing your pillow and tucking in the corners of the quilt, just so as if this tiny bit of order might finally invite sleep. Historians still argue whether all this focus on the sleeping environment helped, or if it just gave people something else to worry about. After all, there's a fine line between comfort and obsession, and the Victorians excelled at towing it. A small joke forms in your mind: perhaps, if you wrapped yourself in enough curtains, you'd become invisible to insomnia itself. You smile in the dark, recognizing that the quest for a perfect sleep setting is timeless. Today's blackout shades and white noise machines owe a quiet debt to yesterday's velvet drapes and tightly sealed sashes. Eventually, with the room as close to draft-proof as it will ever get, you settle back, listening for the absence of breeze and the comforting heavy hush. Maybe this will be the night your efforts pay off. Or maybe you'll just add another chapter to your ever-growing mental guide, How Not to Sleep Volume 99. Still wide awake, you glance at the far corner of your room where a curious piece of furniture waits in the shadows. It's not a child's cradle or a nursery rocker, but something a bit more ambitious, an adult-sized rocking chair built solid enough to weather a thunderstorm. The Victorians, always on the lookout for comfort or at least distraction, believed in the soothing power of gentle motion. If a cradle worked for babies, why not for grown-ups desperate for shut-eye? With a small creak, you settle into the chair and begin to sway forward and back, forward and back. The movement is slow, deliberate, and hypnotic. You try to picture yourself as the picture of Victorian composure wrapped in a paisley shawl, reading by lamplight. But in truth, you feel a bit like a drowsy ship captain in a stormless sea. Historians still argue whether rocking actually induces sleep, or if it just lulls you into a deeper awareness of how long the night is. One mainstream fact: adult rocking chairs became immensely popular in the 19th century, praised for their healthful oscillation. Medical journals touted their benefits for digestion, nerves, and of course insomnia. Many a sleepless Victorian swore that the secret to better sleep was a few dozen good rocks before bed. The quirky tidbit: some inventors designed elaborate rocking beds. Yes, actual full-size beds on curved runners, meant to mimic the sensation of a cradle. These often turned out to be more effective at waking up your spouse than lulling you to dreamland. As you rock, you imagine the parade of Victorians who came before you. Authors, clergymen, and even Queen Victoria herself, all giving their best to the art of adult swaying. A certain doctor named Erasmus Darwin, grandfather to Charles, once built a rocking couch so grand It required 2 people to operate it, proving that if nothing else, the Victorians were never outdone in the pursuit of complicated comfort. The repetition is oddly calming, the world shrinking to the creak of the chair and the soft swirl of night air. You let your eyes close, and for a moment almost believe you could drift off. Maybe this is why some households kept their rockers near the fireside, so the drowsy could rock themselves to the rhythm of crackling embers. Historians still debate whether these efforts actually worked, or whether the true cure was simply the boredom of endless rocking. You try to imagine the alternative, a bed that sways. You picture yourself, eyes drooping as the bed slides gently side to side, only to abruptly remember that you forgot to wedge something under the runner. Suddenly you're wide awake again, pondering Victorian engineering and chuckling at the thought of a midnight tumble. With a small sigh, you let the chair, still enjoying the lingering sense of motion. There's something comforting in the attempt, even if the result is a little silly. After all, you're only following in the well-worn grooves of countless insomniacs before you, rocking, swaying, hoping that tonight might be the night the cradle effect actually works for grown-ups. Still restless, you resign yourself to the next logical step, medical advice, Victorian style. In an era obsessed with self-improvement and propriety, doctors were never shy about prescribing a cornucopia of unusual regimens for sleeplessness. You lie very still, awaiting the imaginary footsteps of a mustachioed physician, who in the dead of night would make a house call equipped with his leather bag, a sense of solemnity, and if you were lucky, a few outlandish ideas. The examination is brisk but thorough, tongue-out pulse, checked, a gentle poke at your temples, all while he jots mysterious notes in an impossibly small ledger. One mainstream historical fact: the Victorians trusted doctors as authorities on almost everything, especially when it came to sleep troubles. Medical advice ranged from the sensible "take some air, avoid rich food," to the downright alarming. For instance, some practitioners advocated the use of mustard plasters applied to the chest, claiming the heat would draw restlessness from the lungs. Historians still argue whether the real cure was just the burning distraction. Then, there were the electric belts marketed with the gravest promises, a battery-powered contraption that when worn around your waist would stimulate the nerves and invigorate the system. You imagine strapping one on, the slight tingle of current, reminding you more of a failed science experiment than a lullaby. Still, Victorians bought thousands, always hopeful for the latest marvel in home medicine. No list of strange regimens is complete without mention of the cold bath. If you were truly desperate, your doctor might insist on a brisk plunge before bed, a shivery ordeal meant to shock the nerves into tranquility. Some even kept tubs in the bedroom ready for midnight submersion. You shudder just thinking about it, comforted by your modern hot water bottle. A quirky tidbit for the especially daring: there were patent sleep machines, elaborate contraptions that mimicked rain or bird song with clockwork gears and bellows. One model promised to sing the insomniac to rest, though the reviews were mixed at best. Historians still debate whether anyone found peace from these inventions, or merely a new source of late-night frustration. You lay back and picture the doctor's departing advice: patience, plenty of fresh air, and should all else fail, a brisk walk around the drawing room. You imagine yourself shivering in a nightshirt, circling the sofa, while the clock strikes 3. The electric belt buzzing gently and a mustard plaster warming your chest. Surely at some point you'll get so tired, you'll sleep just to escape the regimen. For a moment you almost wish for one of those absurd machines, a brass and oak box, huffing and clicking beside your bed, promising dreams on demand. But even as you smile at the absurdity, there's a strange comfort in these attempts, a reminder that across centuries people have always done whatever it takes to outwit their own restless minds. As your night drifts on, you remember another peculiar Victorian tactic: the use of scents to summon sleep. You fumble around in your bedside drawer and retrieve a delicate sachet, a tiny cloth pouch plump with dried lavender-pressed rose petals, and perhaps a suspiciously mysterious scrap of something labeled soothing herbs. For Victorian sleep was not just about the feel of bed linens or the taste of a bedtime cordial, but also about the air you breathed as you slipped beneath the covers. One mainstream historical fact: Victorian households were awash in the language of flowers, and lavender was queen among sleep aids. Herbalists, physicians, and home columnists alike recommended stuffing pillowcases, nightcaps, and even mattress seams with calming botanicals. The belief was that inhaling these gentle fragrances would coax the mind away from its nightly tumults. A quirky tidbit: some sachets contained ingredients that would make a modern sleeper hesitate, such as hops, camphor, or even a few mysterious shavings of orris root. Historians still argue whether these fragrant concoctions actually delivered restful slumber or simply masked the musty scents of old bedding. You squeeze the sachet gently, releasing a puff of lavender that floats into the air. For a moment you think you can almost feel your eyelids getting heavier. In fancier circles, perfumed sleep pomanders, tiny silver or porcelain orbs filled with fragrant mixtures hung from bedposts or tucked into pockets of nightgowns, offering both luxury and placebo in one dainty package. Still, even the best sachet cannot fully banish the anxieties that gather in the dark corners of the mind. You try to imagine the Victorian elite debating the merits of this or that herb. Should it be dried orange blossom or a hint of rosemary? There were even home recipes published in popular magazines, the Insomniac's Herbal Relief, inviting readers to blend their own sleep potions. Historians still debate whether these magazines were trusted resources or just the 19th century equivalent of late-night infomercials. The scent lingers as you burrow deeper into your pillow, comforted by the shared history of 1,000 sleep seekers. Maybe it's the lavender, or maybe it's just the ritual of pausing, breathing deeply, and believing, if only for a heartbeat, that tonight could be different. You can't help but chuckle. Perhaps in another 100 years people will marvel at our own sleep sprays and aromatherapy gadgets. With your little sachet clutched tight, you settle once more and let your mind wander. There's a certain optimism in these rituals, a gentle hope that the simplest things, a flower, a scent, a breath, might be enough to guide you at last toward the edge of sleep. After inhaling every herb and clinging to your lavender sachet, you begin to notice a different kind of Victorian obsession: self-improvement books, stacked neatly on the nightstand. The covers glow with earnest titles like Conquering Restlessness, A Lady's Guide to Tranquil Slumber, and How to Command Your Mind at Bedtime. If the scent of flowers won't do it, perhaps sheer force of will can. You pick up a slim volume and thumb through its pages, half amused, half hopeful. One mainstream historical fact: the late Victorian period saw an explosion in self-help literature fueled by a growing middle class, hungry for solutions to every conceivable problem, including sleeplessness. Manuals on moral hygiene, brain quieting, and nocturnal discipline filled bookshop shelves. The quirky tidbit: some guides advised reciting self-suggestion mantras aloud in the darkness, lines such as, "With every breath I grow heavier, sleepier, more serene," to convince your subconscious to surrender. Historians still argue whether these mantras had any scientific merit or if they simply offered comfort through repetition. You read a few pages aloud, your voice soft in the hush. The authors are a curious bunch. One assures you that rest is a matter of character. Another insists that any truly civilized mind should exercise mastery over its nightly wanderings. There's advice for every kind of insomniac: those who worry too much, those who eat too little, those troubled by indigestion, or too many novels before bed. Historians still debate whether these self-improvement gurus genuinely believed their advice, or just enjoyed a lucrative market for their latest theories. There's a comic edge to it all. One section suggests balancing a book on your head to redistribute nervous energy, a tip that you suspect led to more thuds than dreams. Another promises that simply visualizing yourself as a rock sinking deeper and deeper into the mattress will eventually trick your body into submission. You give it a try only to realize your mind is wandering not toward sleep, but toward a mental checklist of chores for tomorrow. Still, there's comfort in these rituals. You imagine Victorian readers across the city, each wrapped in a cocoon of advice, stubbornly believing that the next page will finally unlock the door to sleep. Even now, self-improvement culture remains alive and well, though perhaps with fewer nightcaps and more blue light glasses. You set the book aside and close your eyes, letting the words drift and scatter. In a way, reading about sleep becomes a lullaby itself, a gentle assurance that you're not alone in your struggle, and that a better night's rest might just be a page away. Your mind drifts to the oddest debate of all, the Victorian fear of night air. As the clock inches past 2, you contemplate the crack of the window, wondering if you dare let in a breeze. For Victorians, the question of whether to welcome or banish outside air was a nightly drama worthy of Shakespeare. There were household factions, pro-window and anti-window, each armed with their own scientific proof and a formidable glare. One mainstream historical fact: in the 19th century, many doctors claimed that night air laden with mysterious miasmas was dangerous, even deadly. Diseases like cholera and consumption were thought to creep in on chilly drafts, so windows were kept firmly shut no matter how stuffy the room. Yet a vocal minority argued for ventilation, swearing by the bracing effect of cold, fresh air. A quirky tidbit: some families actually hired window watchers to sneak around and open or close windows at strategic moments, foiling each other's sleep plans. Historians still argue whether these secret battles helped or harmed Victorian sleep. You picture yourself as the rebel tonight, quietly nudging the sash upward. The air is cold and sharp, slicing through the warmth of your cocoon of blankets. The city outside is muted, muffled by fog and the gentle rattle of distant carriage wheels. There's something thrilling about the forbidden will. This be the night you finally find relief, or wake up with a sore throat and a house full of "I told you so" looks. Household guides argued fiercely. Some said the only path to health was an icy blast before dawn. Others that the best protection against disease was a barricade of glass and velvet. Historians still debate whether these ventilation feuds shaped family lore or simply provided something new to worry about. You remember reading an advice column from the 1880s. If you must admit air, do so only after midnight, and never let the breeze fall directly upon your brow. As you try to follow this wisdom, you end up propping yourself at a strange angle, peeking out at the fog, wondering if anyone ever really got it right. Was the quest for the perfect air just another elaborate ritual to distract from the core truth? Sometimes sleep just refuses to be managed, no matter how well you plan. For now, the compromise is a finger-width gap, a single chill breath admitted as you huddle deeper in the blankets. The room feels different at once, more alive and more mysterious. Maybe tonight the blend of fresh air and old superstition will be just odd enough to nudge you toward rest. As you curl back into bed, that familiar ticking starts up again, a relentless reminder that time never sleeps, even when you can't. The clock on your mantel is a Victorian marvel, its hands gliding silently until the hour strikes, then suddenly erupting into a chorus of chimes. You watch the minute hand crawl forward, half mesmerized, half maddened. For insomniacs, clock watching becomes both sport and torment, a nightly dance with the passage of time. One mainstream historical fact: the 19th century saw the mass production of affordable clocks and watches. So for the first time, even middle-class households could measure the night in exacting detail. Victorians loved their gadgets, but when it came to sleep, these mechanical wonders were a double-edged sword. The quirky tidbit: some sleep manuals advised removing clocks from the bedroom altogether, claiming that nervous patients are too easily obsessed by the mechanical counting of their woes. Historians still argue whether ticking clocks helped soothe the sleepless with their steady rhythm, or simply gave them something new to worry about. You lie there staring at the ornate face of your timepiece, counting off the seconds 1, 2, 3 until the next hour. The silence between chimes is thick with anticipation, as if you're waiting for something miraculous to happen when the clock strikes. Some nights you try to trick yourself into thinking you're in control. If I fall asleep before the next bell, I win. But the clock always wins. The house itself seems to breathe in time with the ticking. You hear distant echoes from other rooms, a faint rattle from the pipes, the sleepy cough of someone down the hall, the slow stretch of wooden beams settling in the night. Each sound becomes part of the ritual, a chorus to accompany the metronome of your thoughts. Every now and then the clock stutters or chimes unexpectedly, a cruel reminder that even the steadiest things sometimes falter. You recall reading a story about a Victorian banker who wound his clock so tightly in hopes of outpacing the night that he broke the mainspring and had to spend the small hours counting his own heartbeats. Historians still debate whether this tale is cautionary or just another entry in the long ledger of midnight mishaps. You close your eyes, vowing not to look at the time again, but the urge always returns. How many hours left until dawn? Does anyone else lie awake listening to the same stubborn rhythm? You find a strange comfort in the shared obsession, the universal impatience to cross the border into morning. Eventually, you try to make peace with the ticking. Maybe you think if you let it carry you, it'll become a lullaby instead of a countdown. After all, the Victorians, clock-obsessed, sleep-deprived, endlessly inventive, were only ever looking for a bit of comfort in the dark. You're still not asleep. And so the house, once quiet, becomes your territory to roam. Victorian homes at night are a world unto themselves, full of narrow staircases, shadowy halls, and doors that never stop groaning on their hinges. The floors are uneven, cold to the touch, and every step is accompanied by the mild terror of stepping on a loose board, or bumping into the ghost of a long-dead ancestor, or more likely the family cat. In the half-light, you find yourself drawn into the ancient tradition of nocturnal wandering, walking the hallways, haunting the house like so many sleepless Victorians before you. One mainstream historical fact: the phenomenon of night walking or somnambulism. Sleepwalking reached near-epidemic fascination in the 1800s, with cases reported in medical journals and the popular press. Victorian writers spun tales of the somnambulists' tragic adventures, and doctors debated whether it was caused by stress, indigestion, or simply too much late-night cheese. A quirky tidbit: some households were so concerned about sleepwalkers that they installed tiny bells on bedroom doors, hoping the sound would alert the family to any midnight adventures. Historians still argue whether night walking was as common as the reports claimed, or whether the sleepless simply found a dramatic excuse for their nocturnal pacing. Tonight you keep your feet firmly on the floor. No risk of sleepwalking for you, just the stubborn, conscious act of roaming. The walls are lined with sepia portraits, all watching you with the vaguely judgmental gaze that Victorians seem to perfect for family photos. You make a game of it, counting the faces as you pass Great Aunt Matilda, who claimed to have slept like a baby on nothing but boiled cabbage and good intentions. Uncle Percy, who once napped through a thunderstorm and a small kitchen fire. Cousin Edith, whose sleeplessness was legendary, and who supposedly kept a diary of every hour she spent awake. Historians still debate whether these nighttime perambulations offered any real relief. Some insisted that a gentle stroll, candle in hand, was the best way to pacify the nerves, while others warned that wandering only fed the anxieties that kept people awake in the first place. For you, there's a comfort in the slow circuit from the hall to the kitchen, past the empty drawing room and back again. You pause at a window, peering into the dark. There's not much to see. Maybe the glint of a distant lamplight, a stray fox padding across the road, or the shimmer of your own reflection, tired but resolute. Somewhere in the house the pipes groan, and the wind rattles a sash, and you remember all the nights spent just like this, roaming, hoping, listening for the faintest sign that sleep might be following quietly behind. Tonight, like so many before you, You walk not just to fill the hours, but to remind yourself you're alive, awake, and ironically, still searching for rest. As you wander the shadowy corridors, your thoughts drift to the curious array of sleep cures the Victorians borrowed from faraway lands. The era was obsessed with anything exotic remedies, objects, or philosophies imported from the mysterious East or the ancient Orient were all the rage. Perhaps you pause in the parlor peering at a lacquered box of Turkish delight or a collection of spice jars that once promised rest to the overworked Londoner. One mainstream historical fact: Victorian apothecaries and department stores imported everything from Persian sleep elixirs to Chinese dream teas, all marketed as miracle cures for insomnia. These concoctions might contain ingredients as mild as chamomile or as potent as hashish, depending on the source and the level of honesty in labeling. A quirky tidbit: wealthy insomniacs were known to order Turkish hookahs or water pipes, not so much for tobacco, but for their calming rituals, clouds of smoke and ornate glass, meant to lull the mind with novelty. Historians still argue whether these imported remedies offered any real benefit, or if their appeal was simply the thrill of trying something forbidden or fashionable. Tonight, you inspect a tin labeled Oriental Slumber Powder Directions, scrawled in elaborate script. Supposedly, a pinch in hot water is all it takes to drift into the sleep of sultans. You hesitate. Modern instincts war with the promise of adventure. The powder smells faintly of cloves and licorice, with a whiff of something distinctly medicinal. You imagine the scene: Victorians gathered in dark-paneled drawing rooms, taking turns inhaling strange scents, sipping unfamiliar teas, and swapping stories about the miraculous calm that would surely descend. You smile at the memory of a dinner guest who once claimed that a single bowl of Arabian sleep soup cured me for a fortnight. Historians still debate whether such tales were wishful thinking or polite fictions spun to impress the host. What's certain is that the allure of the foreign offered a kind of mental placebo, if not true sleep, at least a temporary distraction from the weary parade of sleepless English nights. You nestle into an armchair, swirling a teaspoon of mystery powder into warm milk and raising the cup in a silent toast to insomnia's long, strange journey. The taste is odd but not unpleasant, and the ritual itself feels soothing, a brief escape, a borrowed hope. Tonight, you join a long line of sleepless adventurers, ever eager to sample the next exotic promise, even if the most effective cure is simply the comfort of believing that sleep might finally be on its way. Still awake, you reach for another Victorian marvel, a small music box tucked carefully on the mantel, or perhaps nestled beside your stack of books. In this age before podcasts and playlists, gentle melodies spun from winding gears, and tiny metal teeth offered a different kind of lullaby. You wind the box, hear its quiet click, and then the sweet tinny cascade of notes that fill the shadows with a soft mechanical comfort. One mainstream historical fact: music boxes became immensely popular in the 19th century, prized for their ability to provide music at home, long before the phonograph. Many were designed specifically as bedtime companions, playing lullabies or gentle waltzes to help both children and adults drift off. The quirky tidbit: ingenious inventors produced lullaby machines with elaborate automata, tiny porcelain figures, rocking cradles, moving sheep, or even acting out whole bedtime scenes, sometimes more fascinating than sleep-inducing. Historians still argue whether these mechanical wonders lulled people to sleep or just kept them mesmerized, lying wide-eyed as the song spun on. Tonight, you let the music play. The melody is slow, simple, and oddly reassuring, a minuet perhaps, or Brahms's lullaby reimagined through a cascade of chimes and whirs. You watch the little dancers on the lid spin and bow, their painted faces beaming out across the flickering candlelight. For a moment, the melody's repetition becomes a hypnotic anchor, your breath unconsciously sinking to the gentle rhythm. If you're lucky, the music box runs long enough to ease you into a softer state, the world blurring just a bit at the edges. Sometimes, though, the winding runs out too soon, leaving you with a sudden silence more deafening than the ticking clock. You imagine generations of Victorians winding and rewinding, hoping for a few more bars to bridge the gap to morning. There are stories of sleep-obsessed inventors tinkering well into the night, attempting to engineer the perfect lullaby mechanism, one that would play until dawn, never faltering, always cradling its owner in a musical embrace. Historians still debate whether these dreams ever succeeded, or if their makers simply found comfort in the quiet whir of possibility. As the final notes fade, you lie in stillness, music box on your chest, fingers tingling from the vibrations. Maybe sleep hasn't come yet, but at least the melody has replaced the anxious drone of your thoughts with something lighter. And when all else fails, you tell yourself you can always wind the box again. Sleep still proving elusive, you decide to indulge in one of the Victorian era's most charming oddities, fashionable nightwear. In this world, sleep was a stage and bedtime attire, a curious blend of practicality, social status, and occasionally outright whimsy. You slip into your softest nightshirt, tug on a cap that flops over one eye, and for a brief moment you're a character in a Dickens novel, albeit one still wide awake. One mainstream historical fact: the 19th century witnessed a boom in specialized sleepwear. Nightcaps, nightgowns, and long-sleeved slumber suits became standard for men, women, and children alike, supposedly guarding against chills and, more superstitiously, bad dreams. A quirky tidbit: some Victorians believed that embroidered symbols on nightclothes like stars or tiny moons could offer extra protection against nightmares. Historians still argue whether these sartorial rituals were more about warmth or social signaling. Did you really need a ruffled nightcap? Or was it simply the height of proper domestic fashion? You take a moment to appreciate the layers: crisp linen against your skin, a woolen wrap thrown over your shoulders, socks thick enough to muffle even the coldest draft. In wealthier homes, nightwear was as carefully tailored and monogrammed as any day suit, with lace trims, ribbons, and sometimes even perfumed linings. The Victorians, never content to do things halfway, produced nightgowns of every style and material, from simple homespun cotton to imported French lawn, so fine it was almost transparent. Historians still debate the symbolic meaning behind certain colors and motifs. Did blue really soothe the soul? Or was it just a matter of matching the bedroom wallpaper? Some guides recommended a clean nightshirt every evening, not just for hygiene but to leave behind the cares of the day. You imagine the nightly ritual: shedding the workday, donning your sleep identity, and hoping that fresh linen will bring fresh dreams. You glance in the mirror, nightcap askew, looking less like a dashing Victorian and more like a befuddled schoolboy. You can't help but laugh softly at the absurdity of it all. How much effort people have always poured into something as simple and as elusive as a good night's sleep. Bundled up and feeling oddly regal, you slide back under the covers. Perhaps tonight your embroidered stars will fend off any lurking nightmares. Or at the very least, you'll be the best-dressed insomniac on the block. Snuggled in your finest nightwear, you finally take notice of your bed, a monumental construction built to last generations, and if the catalogs are to be believed, to guarantee the deepest, healthiest slumber. The bedstead creaks mightily as you shift its iron frame, cool to the touch and reassuringly immovable. Victorian beds were a point of pride and a serious investment, promising safety from drafts, vermin, and the insidious night air. One mainstream historical fact: as the Industrial Revolution transformed furniture making, iron and brass beds surged in popularity, touted as healthier and cleaner than their wooden counterparts. The Victorian obsession with hygiene drove demand for sturdy, wipeable frames that discouraged the bedbugs and dust mites rumored to breed in softer, more porous materials. The quirky tidbit: some bed manufacturers even advertised their wares as impervious to ghosts and melancholy vapors, a selling point that's hard to beat even today. Historians still argue whether these heavy-duty beds truly improved sleep quality or simply gave households a sense of control in an unpredictable world. You gingerly test the mattress, which is anything but soft by modern standards. It's a stiff, lumpy affair stuffed with horsehair straw, or in particularly posh households, a thin layer of feather down. You think back to the Victorian guides that recommended regularly beating the mattress to banish any lingering worries or actual pests. The bed itself sits high above the chilly floor, raised on clawed feet, or wheels, often with a woolen rug tucked beneath to keep out the damp. If you shift, the springs groan in protest, a mechanical symphony that Victorians tolerated in the name of progress. Some inventive souls tinkered endlessly, adding springs, levers, and even early forms of adjustable headrests. Historians still debate whether these innovations made sleep more restful, or just introduced a new round of squeaks to keep everyone awake. You lie back, surveying the canopy overhead, a dust ruffle swaying slightly in the lamplight, and imagine all the previous generations who slept or didn't sleep on this same bed. It's not so different from the endless parade of insomnia that winds through every era, from straw pallets to memory foam. Tonight, you nestle into the lumpy mattress, feeling oddly reassured by its heft and its history. Maybe there's no perfect bed, no matter the century, but there's comfort in knowing you're part of a long tradition, tossing, turning, and hoping the next position will finally coax sleep from the shadows. The clock ticks on, and still your mind whirls, so you consider a different sort of nightcap, the kind poured from a decanter, or increasingly left untouched in the spirit of self-restraint. In the Victorian era, the debate over bedtime alcohol was almost as heated as the argument about night air. Should you pour yourself a little brandy to quiet the nerves, or bravely embrace the new gospel of temperance, risking the full force of your unfiltered thoughts? One mainstream historical fact: for much of the 19th century, it was entirely respectable to sip a fortified wine, a dash of whiskey, or even a sherry flip before bed. Medical advice columns cheerfully prescribed such tipples to calm agitation and steady the pulse, especially for those suffering from insomnia or nervous exhaustion. The quirky tidbit. By the late 1800s, the temperance movement was gaining steam, and earnest pamphlets warned that even a small dram might invite permanent sleeplessness nightmares, or the ruin of the Constitution. Historians still argue whether Victorians drank themselves to sleep, or lost more rest fretting over whether to drink at all. You eye the cut glass decanter on your bedside table, a wedding gift perhaps, or a relic inherited from a cheerier ancestor. For some, a nightcap meant a medicinal dose of port. For others, a clear conscience and a mug of tepid water. The ritual itself is almost as powerful as the contents: the careful pouring, the clink of glass, the slow warmth that spreads through your chest and into your fingers. There's humor in the dichotomy. Picture the earnest vicar sermonizing about the dangers of drink while his flock tiptoes home to sneak a thimbleful of gin, or the anxious debutante refusing a drop, but later confessing she can't sleep without just a hint of something fortifying. Historians still debate the extent to which these choices reflected true conviction, or just social posturing. How many abstainers secretly indulged behind closed doors? Tonight, you weigh your options: a sip of sherry to dull the edge, or a silent toast to temperance and the purity of a clear head. Either way, you're caught in the same Victorian struggle, a tightrope walk between comfort and virtue, habit and hope. You decide perhaps on a compromise, a warm cup of milk spiced with a dusting of nutmeg. As you drink, you marvel at how little the ritual has changed, even as fashions, medicines, and philosophies come and go. Whether by bottle or by willpower, the search for sleep always seems to come with a side of self-reflection. Even with a belly warmed by sherry or milk, there's always one last barrier to rest: the shadowy world of dreams. For Victorians, nightmares and night terrors were no laughing matter. Midnight phantoms blamed for everything from headaches to mysterious rashes. If you tossed and turned in the dark, you weren't just fighting your own thoughts, but warding off sinister creatures lurking at the edges of sleep. One mainstream historical fact: Victorian doctors catalogued dreams and nightmares in medical journals, debating their origins and effects with academic fervor. Some believed bad dreams were caused by undigested food or an overactive imagination, while others blamed the influence of spirits, moonlight, or stray bits of family gossip. The quirky tidbit superstitions abounded. It was said that sleeping with your feet facing the door could invite nightmares, while a sprig of rosemary tucked under your pillow would keep evil at bay. Historians still argue whether these rituals made any difference or simply served to entertain insomniacs during the longest hours of the night. Tonight, as you lie awake, you remember all the odd family remedies, reciting a prayer backwards, drinking dream water mixed with sugar and rose petals, or asking a trusted friend to guard your dreams by leaving a pair of shoes at the bedroom threshold, toes pointing out. You try to imagine the most outlandish, a tale of a country squire who swore by sleeping in a red nightcap to ward off night hags, or the famous poet who would record his nightmares each dawn, hoping to turn them into verse, and with luck, royalties. Victorian children were especially prone to night terrors, or so their nannies claimed. Parents relied on an arsenal of calming measures, stuffed animals, guardian angels painted on the ceiling, and the ever-present glass of water at the bedside. Historians still debate whether childhood night terrors were more common or simply more talked about, thanks to an age obsessed with the mysterious workings of the mind. You smooth your pillow, check for stray sprigs of lavender or rosemary, and laugh quietly at your own superstition. Tonight, the only monster under the bed is your old friend insomnia, stubborn but familiar. With every breath you try to remind yourself bad dreams, like bad nights, always fade by morning light. Maybe the ritual itself, a few hopeful words, a charm beneath the sheets, is enough to tip the scales in favor of peace. When dreams remain elusive and old superstitions fail, you turn at last to the Victorian pharmacy, a glittering promise of sleep, bottled, boxed, and sold, with all the confidence of an age in love with science. You picture yourself in a cozy apothecary, shelves lined with patent medicines, each labeled with ornate script and improbable claims: Dr. Featherdown's somnolent syrup, slumbering lozenges, Professor Goodnight's nocturnal restorative. The allure is irresistible, even if the ingredients are a mystery. One mainstream historical fact: the Victorian era was a golden age for patent medicines, many marketed as sleep tonics or nervine elixirs. Some contained nothing more dangerous than sugar and flavoring. Others boasted powerful mixtures of morphine, opium, chloral hydrate, or bromide salts. These ingredients weren't just legal, they were considered modern marvels, prescribed by physicians, and recommended in society columns. The quirky tidbit. Some remedies promise to restore natural sleep in 5 minutes, but their effect could be as unpredictable as their formulas. Historians still argue whether these over-the-counter potions did more good or harm, especially as dependency and side effects became more widely known. You open a little tin, perhaps a real relic, perhaps just an heirloom for the imagination, and shake out a tiny chalky tablet. Would you swallow it, trusting the wisdom of Dr. Featherdown, or tuck it back away, worried about tales of patients who fell asleep for days? There's a certain thrill in the ritual, a sense of control over the wild night, even if the science is more hope than certainty. Victorians had a fondness for mixing their own sleep aids at home too. Recipes for homemade sleeping drafts passed from friend to friend: ginger tea laced with valerian or warm cider steeped with poppy heads. Some even tried to concoct their own versions of popular tonics, trusting family tradition as much as modern innovation. Historians still debate which was more effective, the professional bottle or the neighbor's secret recipe. You lie back musing over all these possibilities. There's a small comfort in knowing you have options, even if each one comes with its own risks. Maybe you decide just this once to rely on willpower alone, or maybe the placebo effect is strong enough to win the night. Whatever the outcome, you realize the real magic is in the hope itself, the belief that sleep can be coaxed, persuaded, or purchased if only you find the right formula. By now, the city outside has slipped deeper into night. But insomnia isn't the lonely affliction it seems. In fact, sleeplessness has its own social life. Late-night salons, whispered confidences, and gatherings, where the dark hours become a shared experience, rather than a solitary torment. You imagine slipping quietly into a candle-lit parlor, where a small group of well-dressed Victorians exchange tales of restless nights and curious cures. One mainstream historical fact: Victorian society hosted many evening gatherings specifically designed for the sleepless, from literary salons to health clubs where conversation music and even gentle exercise were prescribed as antidotes to insomnia. These meetings often stretched into the early morning, blurring the line between cure and celebration. The quirky tidbit: some of these gatherings involved sleep circles where participants would take turns reading soothing poetry or humming lullabies, hoping to lull each other into a collective doze. Historians still argue whether these social remedies soothed minds or simply prolonged wakefulness. You find yourself in the midst of such a gathering, listening to a well-known poet describe his struggles with night terrors, while a doctor explains the latest theories about nervous exhaustion. The room smells of bergamot tea and lavender oil, and the gentle hum of quiet laughter and conversation fills the space. There's a peculiar comfort in knowing you're not alone in this liminal time, that insomnia can be shared, discussed, even laughed at. At one corner, a group debates the merits of various remedies. Some swear by cold baths, others by a stiff nightcap, and a few prefer the mechanical lullabies of their music boxes. You hear a whispered legend about a woman who once cured her insomnia by writing letters to her dreams, sending them off in the Morning Post. Historians still debate the origins of such tales, but their persistence speaks to a universal hope. You sip your tea and watch as the night wears on, conversations deepening and voices growing softer. The room feels like a sanctuary for the sleepless, a place where worries are exchanged for camaraderie, and the weight of the long night becomes a little lighter. As the candle burns low, you realize that sometimes the best cure for insomnia isn't medicine or ritual, but the simple knowledge that others are awake with you, holding vigil in the quiet dark. Your night drifts further into the realm of whispered secrets and confessions. The private diaries and anonymous letters Victorian insomniacs poured out like midnight prayers. Imagine yourself curled up with a dim candle, reading the heartfelt pages penned by strangers grappling with the same restless mind. These documents reveal the human side of sleeplessness, the fears, the frustrations, the fleeting moments of hope. One mainstream historical fact: personal diaries were immensely popular during the Victorian era, offering a rare glimpse into daily life and intimate struggles, including insomnia. Many Victorian authors, both famous and unknown, chronicled their night-long battles with wakefulness. A quirky tidbit: some insomniacs wrote letters to sleep itself, personifying it as a fickle friend or elusive lover begging for its return. Historians still argue whether these writings were therapeutic or simply a prolongation of wakefulness. You read a letter from a young woman in Yorkshire who confesses that she lies awake fearing the loss of her mother's health, her mind a whirlpool of worries. Another diary entry describes a gentleman in London who meticulously records each hour of sleeplessness, hoping to find patterns that might unlock the mystery. You smile at an anonymous note scrawled with a joke about the futility of chasing sheep when the sheep have long since gone to bed. These writings also reveal social attitudes. Many authors express shame or embarrassment, as if insomnia were a personal failing rather than a common human experience. There are references to nervous disorders and weak constitutions, phrases that carry a weight of stigma, but also a longing for understanding. You feel a kinship with these sleepless souls, separated by time, but united by shared vulnerability. Their words remind you that insomnia is not merely a physical state, but a deeply emotional journey, one marked by hope, despair, and sometimes quiet humor. As dawn approaches, you close the book comforted by the knowledge that you are part of a long lineage of insomniacs who have written their stories in the dark, waiting for sleep's elusive embrace. With the first hints of dawn peeking through your curtains, you brace yourself for the aftermath, the groggy, disoriented morning that follows a night spent wrestling with wakefulness. You drag yourself out of bed, muscles stiff and mind foggy, stepping into the soft light that promises a new day, even if your body protests. For Victorians, coping with a sleepless night was a ritual all its own, involving a blend of remedies, social expectations, and a generous helping of stubborn resolve. One mainstream historical fact: many Victorian insomniacs relied on morning tonics, mixtures of coffee, tea, or health waters to jumpstart the day. Some households kept special wake-up elixirs on hand, a combination of bitter herbs and mild stimulants designed to shake off the drowsiness without upsetting the stomach. The quirky tidbit. There were even advertisements for morning vigor pills, claiming to restore alertness and chase away the fog of last night's unrest. Historians still debate the efficacy of these concoctions, with some arguing they provided a placebo effect, while others warn of their addictive potential. You reach for a steaming cup, its warmth a small comfort in your weary hands. The aroma is familiar, a mix of roasted beans and sweet spices, and it stirs a flicker of hope. You imagine Victorians huddling over similar mugs in dimly lit kitchens, sharing stories of their sleepless battles and the strategies that helped them face the day. Despite the fatigue, there's a sense of camaraderie in these morning rituals, a silent acknowledgement of the night's struggle. For some, the day meant pushing through the haze with a stiff upper lip. For others, it involved brief naps stolen between appointments, letters, or factory shifts. Historians still argue about how society accommodated or ignored the widespread problem of daytime sleepiness caused by insomnia. Some employers frowned on it. Others turned a blind eye, knowing that rest was a luxury few could afford. As you sip your tonic, you consider the delicate balance Victorians maintained between social duty and personal health. The need to appear composed, productive, and cheerful often clashed with the reality of a body weighed down by exhaustion. You recognize the echoes of this tension in your own reflections, knowing that some things about sleeplessness never change. With the morning sun rising, you prepare to face the world once more, armed with the knowledge that night's trials, though exhausting, are shared across time and experience. The day may be long, but the promise of another night's rest remains just over the horizon. As the day unfolds, you find yourself reflecting on how much the Victorian quest for sleep echoes in our modern world. Despite advances in medicine, psychology, and technology, the struggle against insomnia remains remarkably unchanged. The rituals may have evolved from laudanum to lavender sprays, from rocking chairs to white noise apps, but the human desire for rest continues to shape our lives in curious and persistent ways. One mainstream historical fact: many modern sleep aids such as valerian root and chamomile tea have direct roots in Victorian remedies. The age also laid the groundwork for scientific sleep study, with early researchers beginning to understand the brain's nocturnal rhythms. The quirky tidbit. Some current sleep tracking devices owe their inspiration to 19th century inventions like the sleep diary and the nocturnal observation chamber. Historians still debate how much of Victorian sleep culture has truly informed today's approaches versus being reinvented independently. You pause to consider the continuity of human experience, the way sleepless nights can bridge centuries, connecting you to an array of anxious, hopeful, and inventive souls who all face the same challenge. Maybe it's comforting to know that while technology races forward, some things remain stubbornly timeless. The tossing and turning, the midnight, counting the ritualized cups of warm drink. There's also a cautionary note. Some Victorian cures were dangerous or misguided, reminding us to approach new remedies with care and curiosity. You smile at the irony that even now the perfect solution to insomnia is as elusive as ever. Sometimes it's a pill, sometimes a routine, and sometimes simply the acceptance of sleep's unpredictability. Tonight, as you prepare for bed, you carry with you a little piece of that Victorian spirit, a willingness to try to hope and to find humor in the strange and wonderful pursuit of rest. After all, you remind yourself the history of sleep is as much about human resilience as it is about science and superstition. You close your eyes feeling a soft glow of kinship across the ages. No matter the century, the night belongs to the dreamers and the wide-awake alike. Now, as the night finally yields to the tender light of dawn, you find yourself surrendering not with frustration, but with a quiet sense of peace. The hours have been long filled with the strange, comforting rituals of restless souls who have come before you. You've wandered the halls, counted imaginary sheep, inhaled fragrant sachets, and listened to the tick-tock chorus that measures both time and wakefulness. One mainstream historical fact, the Victorian era's obsession with sleep, birthed many modern ideas about bedtime routines, environmental comfort, and the psychology of rest. But perhaps the greatest lesson from that time is this: sleep is not a battle to be won, but a dance to be embraced with patience and kindness. A quirky tidbit to carry with you: Victorian lullabies often ended with the phrase, "Sleep gentle as a whisper, light as the breeze," a poetic reminder that rest is a delicate, fleeting guest. Historians still debate how much these words helped soothe the restless, or simply comforted the hopeful. You let your breath slow, feeling the soft cadence of your heartbeat merge with the lingering echo of the night's quiet rituals. You imagine yourself wrapped in the warmth of a velvet curtain, swaying gently in a rocking chair, while the faint scent of lavender lulls you closer to dreams. The struggles and oddities of Victorian insomnia may seem distant, but tonight, they've become a shared story, a gentle reminder that even in the darkest hours, you are not alone. The night's mysteries, fears, and remedies blend into a lullaby written across time. As your mind drifts, you realize the art of sleep is not in the chasing, but in the surrender, the letting go of control, the soft acceptance of the night's rhythm. So now you close your eyes fully, allowing yourself to fall slowly and surely into the embrace of rest. The night has stretched long and winding, filled with quiet steps, soft sighs, and the whispered hopes of many restless souls. You've journeyed through the curious world of Victorian insomnia, where rituals mingled with remedies, and the search for sleep was as much about the heart as the head. Now, as the first light of morning tiptoes through your window, you can feel the weight of wakefulness gently lifting. Remember, sleep is not a prize to be seized, but a guest to be invited with patience. Sometimes it comes easily, other times it dances just beyond reach. That's perfectly all right. You've done your best tonight, exploring, imagining, and embracing the strange comfort of those who have lain awake before you. Let your thoughts soften, your breath slow, and your body sink into the quiet rhythm of rest. The world waits patiently for your dreams to return, ready to greet you with the gentle warmth of a new day. Good night, and may your sleep be as deep and sweet as the lullabies sung by candlelight long ago.